Hello, brothers and sisters. Welcome back to our study of life under the sun. Or more precisely, as we've been seeing since the beginning of chapter 8, life under authority, human authority. And I believe that's where it continues to go as we move along. But of course, it's Koala, so his approach is not typical. The way he's going to conclude where he wants to go is not the usual place. Well, we're going to see that as we move along, but for now we continue with verse 5 that says, "Whoever keeps a command will know no evil thing, and the wise heart will know the proper time and the just way." I would say the first part is pretty clear and doesn't need to be explained too much in depth. It's the second part that's a bit more complicated. And I'd say it will continue like that throughout the text. The second part was a bit more convoluted. First part just tells us to keep the command. A command, all command, obey. Like we saw in the beginning of chapter 8. To obey the king, his laws. So you won't have any bad thing come your way or evil. No consequences. That's what he just told us. That's what even Paul said. Obey, no consequences. But what about that second part though? This idea of the wise heart that knows the proper time. Time. Interesting. We'll put that in our pocket for later. I believe the whole point here is that you also need discernment. Yes, obedience to laws is one thing, but when we're talking about the laws, we're talking about don't kill, don't steal. What about day-to-day life? Day-to-day interactions with people. You need some discernment for that. And I believe that's where he's going. Yeah, obedience is good, but you also need some discernment. Because for there is a time and a way for everything, although man's trouble lies heavy on him. And the first part's pretty clear. Why do we need discernment? Because there is a time and a season for all things. Which kind of brings us back to chapter 3, right? The whole poem about the seasons and the times. As we learned then, and we remind ourselves now, it's not about trying to figure out God's season and timing. Because the whole point, he told us back then, is that God leaves us with questions, not knowing what season it is. But that doesn't take away the fact that we still need some discernment about life, about the ways of things. I need discernment to understand how to act with my wife and another woman from the church. Different. Discernment comes in. There's no law that tells me that's discernment. That's some basic wisdom. So at this point we say, yeah, okay. But what about that other part? About that trouble that lies heavy on him? Well, the ASV, American Standard Version, will help us out here with a slightly different translation. Because, that's important, because the misery of man is great upon him. In other words, because there'll be consequences. I believe that's what he's trying to say. He's kind of wrapping it all up. Obey, no consequences. You need discernment so you won't have consequences. It's very difficult as it is, but if you do not know how to deal differently with your wife than a woman from church, you will have problems. You want to save yourself from that through discernment. At this point, we say, yeah, makes sense, Koala. Obey, have discernment, no consequences. Yet, like I said, this man likes to trouble us. So he's going to move on and add, for he does not know what is to be. For who can tell him how it will be? So again, there won't be consequences with discernment, but there's still a sense where you don't know the future. There's still a sense where you, with your discernment, can't figure out what's afterwards, like we saw in chapter 3. So yeah, obey, have some discernment, but understand that won't give you all the answers. There are things in the future. But what things? That's what it's going to go to that great and destructive thing he's already mentioned before. He's going to say, no man has power to retain the spirit or power over the day of death. There is no discharge from war, nor will wickedness deliver those who are given to it. Again, the first part makes it pretty clear. What's the great destructive thing that's after that no discernment can help you with? It's death. Because no matter how much you obey, how much discernment you may have, you can't keep yourself from dying. You have no power over that. He said this before in chapter 2. Remember chapter 2? Where he had built his whole life to try to fix the Haval. But then he realized the one who's going to come after him, his son, might ruin everything. Why did he think of that? Because death crept in his mind. When I die, I leave it all to somebody else. And it could all be ruined. Death, the great equalizer, is, in a sense. The great Haval. The bent thing that only God can unbend or bend as he pleases. So at this point we say, yeah, okay, makes sense. But what's this notion of no discharge from war, or destruction, or difficulty? Probably a better way to translate that. Nor will wickedness deliver the one who is wicked. It's a point here. Here's what I think. And I could be wrong. I think he's making a counterbalance. Because on one side he said, obey, have discernment, no consequences. Except for the fact you can control your life and death. So what's the response to that in our evil hearts? Well, then let's eat and drink, for tomorrow we die. Like we saw in chapter 7. Remember? When he said in chapter 7, do not be overly righteous, because you'll destroy yourself. And what's the natural response? Then I'll just give myself to evil. But he said, whoa, don't do that either. I believe he's going back to that now. He's going back to that same truth, because he knows that the tendency is saying, well, if obedience won't save my life, then let me just be as evil as I can, because it doesn't change anything. And he says, no, that's not going to help you either. Okay, well, what will then go out? That's the problem. He's not going to tell us overtly, but covertly. He's going to give some subtle little hints as he concludes with 2 verses. He's going to first say, all this I observed while applying my heart to all that is done under the sun. When man had power over man, to hurt, to his hurt. Again, the first part makes sense. It's here's what I observed, I analyzed, I looked at. Here's what I'm trying to get at. But then he talks about man having power over man. What's the point? Well, okay, it comes back to the beginning of the chapter, when he talked about the kings who can do whatever they want to people, to their subjects, like dictators nowadays. Remember, he talked about the evil person. That evil person that thinks by his evil he can rescue himself from death. And that talks about people who try to take over and dominate people. Put the pieces together. Throughout history, we see how many of these great kings, rulers, dictators, have believed that by taking such power, putting themselves over others, they become like gods. They rule over everything. Many have said that we're not gods and we will never die. And I believe that's what God is getting here. They think that by the evil and dominating over others and grabbing such power that they'll be beyond the touch of death. But that's not going to work either. And that's why God ends by saying this though. Then I saw the wicked buried. They used to go in and out of the holy place and will praise in the city where they had done such things. This also is vanity. What? What exactly is this vanity? What is this haval, this emptiness he's referring to? How the wicked people. The wicked people who look good. They went to the holy place. They were praised. They did everything right. But they were still wicked. They tried to cover it up. But they were still wicked. They seemed to be blessed, but they were still wicked. That to Koala seems like it's just a haval, which kind of makes me think of Asaph. Remember Asaph's song? When he looks at the world and the wicked people who do horrible things and seem to be blessed by the Lord. They get to live however they want. All the hypocrisy of going to the temple and everything. And yet, you get the people who are righteous, like Asaph, trying to do the right thing, and they suffer. Now he gets irritated until he walks into the house of God. In other words, he kind of looks at afterwards. And that's when he realizes they will end up suffering. They will end up being blessed. I believe Kohelet is kind of invoking that here. Especially when you put all of this together. You get those who are obedient, those in right discernment, they still die. Then you get the wicked saying, we'll, through evil, try to take over death. And they still die. And they're even praised because they seem to be so amazing compared to the other people. How frustrating all this is. And without saying it, without pointing to it, I believe Kohelet is saying, then there has to be something more. I mean, that's what he does over and over again. He provokes us to think that there has to be something more than just life under the sun. There has to be something that's after this that makes more sense than this. I think that's what he's trying to bring us to, like Asaph's psalm. And that's important for us as Christians, because we can get so hyper-focused on, I did the right thing, I put in the right effort, and it didn't work in the church. My ministry didn't work. My family didn't work. And many times what happens after that? We go to the evil side. Then I'm just going to give up on faith. I'm going to give myself over to the flesh. But that too is haval, is emptiness. The only way to deal with all this is to look to afterwards, like Asaph did. I might be going too far, maybe further in the text, but I don't think so. I think the whole point is to provoke us to consider that there has to be something else. More than just making it under the sun or trying to dominate life itself. There has to be something more. Hopefully it speaks to our hearts. We need to look to that something more, brothers and sisters. On that note, be blessed.